I want you to imagine, just for a second, stumbling into this secret hidden archive.
Oh, I love a good hidden archive.
Right. But this one, it contains the literal blueprints of every major counterculture movement of the last 50 years.
Wow.
I mean, everything from punk rock to cyberpunk, body modification, industrial noise, all of it.
Real underground stuff.
Exactly. Because long before the internet made every obscure niche hobby instantly searchable.
Right. When things were actually hard to find.
Yeah, if you wanted to find the absolute bleeding edge of culture, you didn't look at mainstream media. You looked for one specific, independently published physical book.
And that brings us to the subject of today's deep dive.
It does. Today we are diving into Vale and his San Francisco-based publishing project, Research.
Which, honestly, calling research just a magazine or a publication almost diminishes what it actually was.
Oh, totally.
I mean, it functioned way more like a systematic historical archive at the fringe.
Yeah.
From the late 1970s onward, this project just meticulously recorded the underground music, film, and art scenes that mainstream society was, well, either actively ignoring or genuinely terrified of.
Which sets up our mission for this deep dive perfectly. We really want to explore how one fiercely independent DIY zine managed to take these incredibly taboo subcultures and elevate them into recognized artistic movements.
And why that actually matters today.
Exactly. We want to see what this massive archive teaches you, the listener, about the true value of passionate niche communities. So, okay, let's unpack this.
Let's do it.
Because to understand the sheer scale of what Vale built, we actually have to start with a literal passing of the torch.
From one generation of outcasts to the next.
Yeah.
The lineage here is just fascinating because before the Research banner officially launched in 1980, Vale was actually putting out a predecessor zine.
Called Search and Destroy.
Right, Search and Destroy, which ran from roughly 1977 to 1979. And at the time, he was working at the legendary City Lights bookstore in San Francisco.
Which is such a crucial detail.
It really is. Because while he was there, he actually received direct support and funding from Lawrence Ferlinghetti and Allen Ginsberg.
Which is just wild to think about. I mean, two of the most towering figures of the 1950s Beat generation, just handing over cash to a young guy so he could document the emerging West Coast punk scene.
It's a total clash of eras.
On paper, it's a completely jarring image. You have these older literary giants, famous for, acoustic poetry and jazz clubs.
Snapping their fingers in cafes.
Right. And they're financing a gritty, chaotic, screeching punk zine. I kind of look at it like a relay race where the 50s counterculture is literally handing the baton to the 70s counterculture. But it begs the question, why would established literary giants care about a gritty punk zine?
Well, what's fascinating here is that Ginsberg and Ferlinghetti weren't looking at the aesthetic surface.
They didn't care about the safety pins and the leather jackets.
Exactly. They were looking at the structural mechanics of the rebellion. I mean, the Beats looked at the post-war 1950s, the suburbs, the Red Scare, the intense pressure to conform.
And they saw it as spiritually stifling.
Completely. And then you fast forward 20 years, and the punks are looking at the late 1970s, seeing economic stagnation in corporate rock.
And diagnosing the exact same societal sickness.
Yes, they shared the exact same fundamental DNA of rejecting mainstream conformity.
So it's less like a relay race and more like they were funding a cultural Noah's Ark.
Oh, I like that analogy.
Because the Beats understood, from their own painful history with censorship, that if you don't document your own underground movement, the dominant culture will just erase you.
Or turn you into a cartoon.
Exactly. They saw Vale building a vessel to ensure these fringe ideologies actually survived.
And that is the crucial underlying logic. Vale wasn't just stapling together fan pages for local bands.
No, he was doing real work.
He was engaged in real-time, systematic archiving. He treated the punk scene with the rigor of an anthropologist because he knew that raw, chaotic energy was a legitimate cultural response.
But, you can't sustain a rebellion on pure chaotic noise forever.
Right, things have to evolve.
They do. As the 70s bled into the 80s, that three-chord punk energy started to mutate. The rebellion moved away from traditional guitars and began experimenting with machines.
The birth of industrial music.
Exactly. And this is where Search and Destroy ends, and research is officially born in 1980.
Starting with their massive release, the Industrial Culture Handbook,
Yeah.
which, by the way, is still utilized as the foundational text for understanding the origins of the entire industrial genre.
It's a literal textbook for the underground.
It really is. I mean, it demanded revisions and re-releases in 1987 and again in 2000. It's that important.
But the physical logistics of creating that handbook are just staggering when you think about it.
Oh, it was a nightmare.
Right. We are talking about an era with no email, no digital layout software.
Just analog everything.
Vale is conducting these intense philosophical interviews with pioneers of the industrial sound, like Throbbing Gristle and Cabaret Voltaire.
Via landline phone calls and physical international mail.
And then typing the massive layouts himself on a manual typewriter?
Yeah, and physically hand-delivering those boards to the printer. It was the absolute pinnacle of the DIY ethos.
Just incredible dedication.
The underlying philosophy was basically, if the establishment won't print it, you must become the printing press.
I do want to push back on this a little bit, though.
Okay, go for it.
Because in an era before the internet, why go through all this painstaking manual labor just to document what most of society considered unlistenable, abrasive noise?
That's a fair question.
I mean, why bleed for a genre that aggressively pushes people away?
To answer that, we have to look at how noise music actually functions. Mainstream music relies on melody, right?
To create a sense of comfort or emotional release.
Exactly. But industrial noise does the exact opposite. It uses literal factory clangs, tape distortion.
It's relentless arrhythmic pounding.
Yeah, to force the listener to physically experience the sensory overload of a mechanized society.
Ah, I see.
When something is entirely undocumented, when society at large refuses to acknowledge the anxiety of the modern age.
The simple act of recording that anxiety becomes a revolutionary act.
Precisely. Take Throbbing Gristle's 1980 album, 20 Jazz Funk Greats.
Which is an entirely sarcastic title, by the way.
Oh, completely.
Yeah.
The cover features the band dressed like completely normal, everyday people standing in a pleasant field.
But that field was actually a notorious suicide spot in the UK.
Right. And the music inside was this intense, horrific fusion of social critique and harsh sound experiments.
They were highlighting the terror lurking just beneath the surface of polite society.
And Cabaret Voltaire did something very similar with their 1981 album Red Mecca.
Reflecting all that geopolitical dread.
Yeah, it captured the deep urban anxiety and the heavy paranoid atmosphere of the Cold War. It's essentially audio journalism of a world living under the constant threat of nuclear annihilation.
Wow. And if you don't have a dedicated archivist like Vale taking the time to type out those interviews,
To explain the deep philosophical intent behind the tape loops.
that entire artistic movement just gets dismissed as a racket.
Exactly. Consider a group like SPK and their 1987 album Leichenschrei.
Oh, yeah.
That record pushed the absolute pinnacle of noise aesthetics. It merged ritualistic elements with deep societal panic.
And Vale gave that noise intellectual context. He proved they were translating the specific anxieties of the late 20th century into a new sonic language.
Which perfectly sets up the next massive evolutionary leap for the underground.
Because if you truly believe the world is becoming a hostile, mechanized machine, that mindset doesn't just stay confined to music.
No, it bleeds into everything.
It inevitably bleeds into how you view your own physical form. I mean, if everything around you is industrialized, what happens to the human body?
We move from the industrialization of sound to the radical reclamation of the flesh.
And this is where research completely shatters the boundaries of what a publication could do.
Oh, definitely.
Because in 1981, they drop an issue called Modern Primitives. And, today you can walk into a corporate boardroom and see someone with a full sleeve of tattoos.
It's totally normalized now.
But in 1981, body modification, heavy tattooing, piercings, scarification, that was viewed as severe societal deviance. It was genuinely taboo.
But Modern Primitives completely reframed that narrative. It featured figures like Fakir Musafar, who was exploring ancient tribal body rituals in a contemporary setting.
Elevating it from a taboo to an art form.
Exactly. The argument research put forward was profound. In a Cold War world that feels entirely out of your control, where politicians might push a button and end civilization tomorrow.
The one and only thing you still have absolute sovereignty over is your own physical body.
Right. Modifying the flesh becomes the ultimate act of taking back control.
They elevated what the mainstream considered mutilation into a highly disciplined, recognized art form, which directly influenced future performance art globally.
And that talent for providing a philosophical foundation extended to how they analyzed visual media, too.
Oh, the film stuff is fascinating.
In 1983, they published Incredibly Strange Films, which applied rigorous, serious critical analysis to B-movies and cult films.
They took movies that played in seedy midnight theaters and treated them with the respect usually reserved for, like, French New Wave cinema.
Yeah, the legendary cult director John Waters actually had a great quote about this.
What did he say?
He said, "Only Vale treated my films as having cultural value."
Wow.
I mean, Waters spent his entire career deliberately trying to shock and disgust the mainstream. Yet he recognized that Vale was the only one who understood the cultural critique hiding inside that shock value.
Because Vale possessed this rare ability to strip away the abrasive exterior of a piece of art and examine the structural skeleton underneath.
He was a master of spotting patterns across seemingly disconnected mediums.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though, because that pattern spotting led to one of the most brilliant editorial moves of the decade.
The J.G. Ballard interview.
Yes. In 1988, Vale travels all the way to London to conduct this massive, definitive interview with the British science fiction author J.G. Ballard.
And for anyone who hasn't read him, Ballard is known for these incredibly dense, psychological visions of the near future.
Books about technology mutating human psychology.
And Ballard himself was genuinely surprised by the attention. He actually said he had absolutely no idea that the punk generation was out there devouring his sci-fi novels.
He didn't see the immediate connection between his literary world and the underground music scene.
But Vale saw the invisible threads.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, Vale realized that a British sci-fi author, a cult filmmaker from Baltimore, and a kid in San Francisco pushing a safety pin through his ear.
We're all fundamentally dissecting the exact same cultural anxieties.
They were all desperately trying to navigate human identity in an increasingly mechanized, media-saturated landscape.
On the surface, J.G. Ballard's prose, John Waters' trash cinema, and Throbbing Gristle's tape loops look and sound like they exist on different planets.
But research gathered them in one room and proved they were all speaking the same underlying language.
And once you see that thematic thread, you can trace it straight through the cinematic masterpieces of the following decades.
Oh, absolutely. Think about David Cronenberg's Videodrome from 1983.
Which literally visualizes the merging of human flesh and television media.
Or Shinya Tsukamoto's 1989 cult classic Tetsuo, The Iron Man. It's this brilliant, hyperkinetic Japanese film that explicitly uses body modification to explore intense urban alienation.
And you can follow that trajectory all the way to Mamoru Oshii's Ghost in the Shell in 1995.
Tackling the deep philosophy of AI and cyborg identity.
The questions about where the machine ends and the human begins were questions Vale was cataloging decades before the internet made them mainstream talking points.
It's just a completely unbroken lineage. From 3 chords in a sweaty basement, to industrial factory noise, to modifying the physical body, straight into cybernetics and AI philosophy.
Vale charted the evolution of how humans relate to technology before most people even owned a personal computer.
But, documenting that evolution requires a massive amount of endurance.
Oh, yeah. Operating entirely outside the mainstream establishment means you don't have access to corporate distribution.
Or advertising dollars.
Exactly. The financial struggles were constant. Research operated with relatively low print runs, and surviving as an independent publisher is notoriously brutal.
But despite the lack of massive financial backing, they developed a fiercely dedicated global readership.
And there's a guiding principle from V. Vale that explains how they managed this.
I love this quote.
He said, "Passionate readers are more important than massive print runs."
That single sentence is a profound indictment of how we generally measure success today.
It really is.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener, right now? I mean, think about your own media diet today.
We live in an ecosystem where success is almost exclusively dictated by scale.
Chasing millions of hollow clicks, pleasing viral algorithms.
Accumulating passive views from people who will just scroll past a video without ever truly registering what they just consumed.
Vale's philosophy is the absolute antithesis of that algorithmic treadmill.
It reinforces the belief that culture is most vital when it is deeply internalized by a few, rather than mindlessly skimmed by millions.
Quality of engagement dictates historical survival.
Yes. Research didn't just ship books into a void. They built a tangible intellectual network. In San Francisco, they functioned as a physical hub, gathering incredibly experimental groups
Groups like survival research laboratories.
who were doing these massive, dangerous underground performances using customized industrial machines to simulate chaotic post-apocalyptic conflicts.
Or places like Other Cinema, which provided a physical sanctuary for experimental film.
They weren't just reporting on a community, they were actively constructing the architecture for it to exist.
And that shared intensity is the only mechanism that allows true avant-garde art to survive time.
Consider the Japanese noise artist Merzbow and his year 2000 album Pulse Demon.
A landmark achievement in extreme acoustic experimentation.
It is a wall of absolute, overwhelming static and frequency manipulation. An artifact like that does not survive in the cultural memory because it accidentally goes viral.
Or gets played on pop radio.
Right. It survives because it is kept alive by the exact type of fiercely dedicated, highly concentrated niche audience that Vale cultivated.
They built the root system that allowed the underground tree to actually grow.
They proved that preservation requires passion, not just reach.
It really is an incredible arc when you step back and view the whole timeline.
Truly.
It starts with a guy working at a bookstore in San Francisco, receiving a financial lifeline from the beat poets of the 50s.
He takes that torch and channels it into the relentless archiving of punk rock,
Which evolves into the abrasive truth of industrial noise.
which transforms into the reclamation of the physical body.
And ultimately maps the philosophical blueprints of our cybernetic future. Research transcends being a mere publication. It is an essential cultural heritage site.
They demonstrated that the fringe isn't just a sideshow. The fringe is where the future is actively being prototyped.
Absolute.
But, examining the legacy of research leaves us with a rather unsettling puzzle regarding our current cultural landscape.
No, let's hear it.
Well, in our modern, hyper-connected reality, every fleeting thought, every niche hobby, and every minor aesthetic is instantly broadcast.
Indexed by search engines and immediately metabolized by algorithms to sell us things.
Right. So if everything is instantly visible, is it even possible for a true underground to exist anymore?
That is the ultimate paradox of the internet age. If the lights are always on, there are no shadows left to hide in.
Exactly. Or, and this is the thought to chew on, is there a completely new avant-garde operating out there right now?
Hidden in plain sight.
Entirely bypassing the internet and the algorithms, just waiting for the next archivist to come along and decipher their language.
That is the perfect question to leave hanging in the air, because somewhere out there, a new blueprint is inevitably being typed up.
I believe it.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the archives. Keep questioning the consensus, look closely at the margins, and stay insanely curious.